Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
A mother's plea. Elena Nowak shook, her fingers ached as she clutched the worn briefcase. The air inside John Bishop's apartment tasted acrid, a blend of stale tobacco and a faint, coppery tang. As if the very walls had absorbed old wounds outside, rain lashed the glass. A relentless percussion that echoed the dread drumming in her chest. Sleep had abandoned her days ago. Bishop, a man hewn from flint and haunted by shadows, watched her from across the room. His face was a palimpsest of hard experience, lines, etched by sleeplessness and battles waged out of sight that he offered neither solace nor succor. "Mr. Bishop?" she managed, her voice thin and reedy. "I desperately need your help. That my daughter Anya, she's vanished." He remained unmoved, his gaze like the steely gray of a Baltic squall, unwavering. "The authorities? Have they been involved?" "Yes, of course. But they dismiss it as teenage angst. A runaway. But Anya wouldn't. She wouldn't simply disappear." Elena's voice fractured. She wrestled with the briefcase clasp, finally revealing a chaotic collection of photos, creased flyers, and a threadbare teddy bear. "One eye missing, a silent witness to childhood. I filed a missing persons report," she stated, pushing the document across the cluttered surface. Her photo. Bishop didn't acknowledge it. He remained a study in stillness. "Ms. Nowak, I offer solutions, not miracles. I'm a security consultant, not a private investigator." "But you possess knowledge," Elena implored, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "People say you see what others overlook, that you can locate anyone." At long last, he picked up the photograph. Anya's vibrant smile met his gaze, radiating an untarnished joy. Bright, hopeful eyes and a dusting of freckles danced across her nose. 16 years of age. The report stated last seen leaving school on Tuesday afternoon. A flicker of something akin to pain crossed Bishop's features, a long-suppressed emotion stirring. He placed the photo down with a deliberate, almost reluctant slowness. "Runaways bleed resources dry, Ms. Nowak. The police are likely correct." She'll resurface. Elena's head swung back and forth, tears now streaming freely. "No, you misunderstand. Anya would never abandon her grandmother. She wouldn't skip piano. She was content, excited about the school play. This is utterly unlike her." She leaned forward, the raw desperation in her voice amplified. "Please, Mr. Bishop. I've heard whispers about you. The feats you've accomplished, the lives you've touched. I'm begging you, help me retrieve my Anya." He lifted the photograph again, his gaze caught by Anya's beaming expression. He discerned something fragile there, a vulnerability that snagged on a long-dormant part of himself, a part he fought to suppress. He conjured another face, another image, a younger girl, flaxen hair cascading down her back. He'd found her too late. He could still see her in his mind's eye, vacant eyes, a broken doll clutched in her cold fingers, the cloying odor of decay. Guilt, a frigid weight, settled like a stone within him. Bishop squeezed his eyes shut, the memory a searing intrusion. That he'd sworn to prevent such horrors. That he'd vowed to remain uninvolved. But the urgency in Elena Nowak's voice, the naked terror in her gaze, it threatened to shatter his resolve. He opened his eyes, the familiar steel returning to his gaze. "Tell me everything. Recount every word, every gesture in the days prior to her disappearance. Omit nothing. No matter how seemingly trivial." He stood, the movement sharp and resolute. "And Ms. Nowak, brace yourself. The truth you uncover might be far more terrible than you imagine." Elena seized the lifeline, hope rekindled. She wiped her face and began to speak, her voice gathering strength with each passing word. She spoke of Anya's companions, her instructors, her passions, the small anxieties she occasionally shared. She recounted the tale of the strange man Anya had mentioned seeing near the school, a figure cloaked in shadows who seemed to always watch. Bishop listened with focused intensity, his face an impassive facade. He fired questions, precise and incisive, slicing through Elena's emotional turmoil. He recorded everything in a small, well-used notebook, the pen scratching a counterpoint to the relentless rain. As Elena continued, Bishop felt a familiar disquiet creep over him, The details bore an unsettling resemblance to cases whispered about in clandestine circles, cases the police preferred to categorize as simple runaways or isolated incidents, cases that carried the stench of something far more malignant. That he moved to the window, gazing out at the rain, slicked streets of Warsaw. He recognized, deep down, that engagement was a mistake, that it would force him back into the abyss he desperately tried to escape. Yet, he couldn't ignore the raw appeal in Elena's eyes, the haunting resonance of a past he could never truly bury. He turned back to Elena, his expression grave. "I'll investigate," he said, his voice a low rumble, "but I offer no guarantees." He knew, however, that he was already committed. He would move mountains, if necessary, to locate Anya Nowak. And if someone had harmed her, they would soon learn the meaning of true regret. Whispers in the dark. "Missing persons cases always claw at you," Sergeant Kowalski murmured, the precinct's harsh fluorescence glinting off his receding hairline. He slid a stack of files across the table's pocked surface. "Especially when people evaporate without a trace, like these women." John thumbed through the photos. Each depicted a young woman, radiating that wide-eyed optimism of a newcomer. All recently arrived. Bullseye. Within the last half-year or so. Full of dreams, eager to conquer Warsaw. Kowalski reached for a cigarette, then hesitated, tucking it back into his pack. And then vanished. No witnesses. No ransom notes. Their apartments untouched. Just gone, like smoke. Examining the portraits, John felt a familiar dread coiling in his stomach. This was the prelude to plumbing the depths of human depravity. Anything else in common besides being fresh off the bus? They all worked for tips. Waitresses, bartenders, a dancer. Cash jobs, easy to scrub from the books. Kowalski's shrug conveyed the weary resignation he'd learned to accept in these kinds of situations. "We've talked to employers, friends, acquaintances. Nada. They're like ghosts. And the police haven't found any links? Zip. Absolutely squat. A few murmurs about debts. Maybe rough boyfriends, but nothing concrete. Take my word, Bishop, I want to bring these girls home. I've got daughters of my own." Kowalski's tone was rough, but his sincerity was palpable. Later, back in his hotel room, the laptop screen cast an eerie glow on John's weary features as he immersed himself in Polish news sites, online haunts, and the shadowy corners of the dark web, hunting for any mention of the missing women. He uncovered threads on expat sites, hints of a predatory environment in certain nightclubs, whispers of young women ensnared in exploitative traps. One name surfaced repeatedly. The Serpent's Kiss. The name prickled his skin. It reeked of cheap theatrics, almost cartoonish in its villainy. Yet, clichés often cloaked the most brutal realities. He located the club's website. Slick images of scantily dressed dancers, promises of decadent nights, and an old-town address that felt both ancient and ominous. A quick check revealed a shell corporation in Cyprus owned the joint. Standard procedure, designed to obscure. That night, a clammy fog enveloped Warsaw, chilling him to the core despite his thick coat. The old town was unervingly silent, the slick cobblestones reflecting the muted streetlight. The Serpent's Kiss screamed for attention, its gaudy neon sign buzzing in the gloom. The bass pulsed even before he reached the entrance, vibrating in the very stones beneath his feet. At a bouncer, a granite wall of a man with eyes that missed nothing, gave him a cursory glance before gesturing him inside. The air inside was a suffocating blend of cigarette fumes, cloying perfume, and the acrid tang of exertion. The dance floor was a chaotic swirl of bodies, fractured by strobing lights. John pushed his way to the bar, ordering a vodka and surveying the scene. The dancers looked too young, their eyes glazed with fatigue or something darker. He watched as a man in an expensive suit, his face florid, guided one of the women towards a back room. The girl's face was a blank canvas, her expression carefully neutral. John nursed his drink, every nerve on alert. A group of men, their faces etched with a predatory hunger, watched the dancers with chilling focus. One locked eyes with him. A silent dare. John looked away, feigning absorption in his drink. He knew he was under scrutiny. He knew he'd walked into a viper pit. But he also knew that buried within this hellhole of vice and exploitation lay the answers to the riddle of the missing women. Waiting to be unearthed, he swallowed the vodka, the icy liquid burning down his throat. The hunt was on. Elite Visions. The reception area of Elite Visions was all polished chrome and strategically placed orchids. John, feeling deeply out of place in his worn leather jacket, smoothed his hair and tried to look the part of a discerning advertising executive. He'd concocted a story about needing fresh faces for a national campaign, hoping it sounded plausible enough. A woman with impossibly high cheekbones and a practiced smile behind the glass desk directed him to a plush, low-slung sofa. "Mr. Sadowski will be with you shortly." The air hung thick with expensive perfume, a cloying sweetness that felt artificial, like the entire room. He waited, flipping through a glossy portfolio filled with images of girls who looked barely old enough to drive. Their eyes held a vacant beauty, the kind that came from hours in front of a camera, or perhaps something darker. A shiver crawled up his spine. Victor Sadowski arrived like a well-groomed predator. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, and possessed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His handshake was firm, almost aggressively so. "Mr. Bishop, a pleasure. I understand you're looking for fresh talent." Sadowski's voice was a smooth baritone, laced with a subtle Polish accent. He gestured towards the portfolio. "We pride ourselves on finding diamonds in the rough, polishing them to perfection." John forced a smile. "Indeed, I'm looking for something specific, a certain vulnerability, perhaps." He watched Sadowski's reaction closely. Sadowski chuckled. A low, throaty sound. "Vulnerability? An interesting choice of words. We prefer to call it potential. Untapped potential." He led John down a hallway lined with doors, each bearing a small brass plaque with a girl's name. The air was buzzing with nervous energy, hushed whispers, and the rhythmic click of high heels on the marble floor. He steered John into his office. A cavernous space overlooking the Vistula River at floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view, but John's attention was drawn to the large framed photograph hanging above Sadowski's desk. A striking, almost ethereal portrait of a young woman. Her eyes wide and pleading. "That's Anya," Sadowski said, noticing John's gaze. "One of our brightest stars. She's currently working in Milan." John nodded, but something about the photograph felt wrong. The girl's forced smile didn't quite mask the fear lurking beneath. Sadowski launched into a practice sales pitch, highlighting Elite Vision's success stories and their rigorous training program. John asked carefully crafted questions, probing for weaknesses in the facade. He feigned interest in the agency's contracts, requesting to see sample documents. While Sadowski was occupied with a phone call, John discreetly used his phone to photograph the contract on the desk, along with employee lists and other documents that lay scattered around the room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. He noticed a file tucked away in a drawer labeled Special Projects. When Sadowski turned back, John quickly averted his eyes. The man was sharp, observant, and radiated an unnerving sense of control. As they walked back towards the reception area, John saw Sadowski stop a young woman in the hallway. She couldn't have been older than 18, her face pale and drawn. Sadowski spoke to her in rapid Polish, his voice low and menacing. The girl flinched, her eyes welling up with tears. "Everything all right, Victor?" John asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sadowski's smile returned, but it was brittle, forced. "Perfectly. Just a minor issue with a new model. They sometimes get homesick, you know?" He placed a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly. "Don't worry, darling. Everything will be fine." The girl simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. John left Elite Visions with a knot of dread in his stomach. The place reeked of exploitation, of broken dreams and shattered innocence. He had seen enough. He knew Sadowski was at the center of it. The charming exterior was just a mask for something truly rotten. Back in his car, John pulled out his phone and scrolled through the photos he'd taken. The documents were damning. The contracts were predatory, favoring the agency at every turn. The employee lists revealed a high turnover rate, with girls disappearing after only a few months, and the special projects file. That was a rabbit hole he needed to explore. He knew he couldn't walk away. Anya's haunted eyes, the frightened girl in the hallway, the chilling perfection of Elite Visions, it all screamed for justice. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This was something far bigger, far more sinister. He dialed Jason's number. "I think I found something," he said, his voice grim. "Something really bad." The Serpent's Code. The air in Victor Sadowski's office hung heavy, a sickening blend of manufactured allure and veiled threat. John leaned forward, the supple leather of the chair offering scant comfort against the granite of his determination. Anya Nowak. The name rang a bell. Victor steepled his fingers, the onyx ring on his hand flashing like a predator's eye. "Mr. Bishop, I manage talent. Faces flit past me like butterflies. Names? Ephemeral. This one should linger," John replied, his voice a gravelly warning. "Last seen exiting Elite Visions." The smile plastered on Victor's face felt brittle. Anya. Vaguely recall. Aspiring, certainly, but lacking that certain spark. The lens wasn't kind. A dismissive flick of his wrist sent a jolt of fury through John. "Released with our sincere well wishes." "Released into whose tender mercies?" John countered, his gaze unwavering. "Mr. Bishop, I take umbrage at that insinuation." Victor retorted, his tone hardening to steel. "Elite Visions cultivates dreams. We don't discard them." John sensed he'd reached a dead end. "Time for a change of tack. Let's discuss your broader portfolio, Victor." "The whispers I've heard. Ventures extending beyond glossies and catwalks." A flicker of genuine unease sparked in Victor's eyes, momentarily eclipsing the polished facade. "You're on a fishing expedition, Mr. Bishop, and wasting valuable time." He stood, a blatant dismissal as John turned to leave. Victor's voice stopped him. "A parting thought, Bishop. You understand the gravity with which Elite Visions operates." He sauntered to a colossal abstract painting, a riot of color dominating the wall, and casually nudged it. The canvas slid aside, revealing a discreet wall-mounted safe. "We anticipate a consignment shortly, codename Nightingale, Priority Alpha. Simply wanted to illustrate our security measures." He smirked and returned the painting to its original position. "Now, good day." Leaving the office, John carried the cloying scent on his clothes like a stain. He didn't buy Victor's casual delivery for an instant. The consignment remark was bait, a deliberate provocation, perhaps a test of his mettle or a twisted dare. Back in his Spartan apartment, John fixated on the details he'd burned into his memory. Nightingale. Priority Alpha. He needed to decipher the code. Reaching for his phone, he hunted through his contacts, seeking someone who navigated the city's shadowy corners. Fluent in the language of back alleys and the digital underground, he found his mark. A reformed hacker known only as Raven. John tapped out a message. "Decryption needed, Nightingale, Priority Alpha. Possible cargo manifest. Critical." While he awaited Raven's reply, John replayed his encounter. The man was a viper, sleek and lethal. He had to locate Anya before it was too late. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Anya huddled in the chill embrace of a cramped, dank room. The shimmering cityscape of Warsaw, once so full of promise, was now a distorted, unreachable mirage beyond the barred window days dissolved into a harrowing blur of hollow assurances and forced compliance. The agency was a cruel deception. The initial allure had evaporated, supplanted by a bone-chilling reality of subjugation. They promised her stardom. Instead, she was a captive, her aspirations strangled by the relentless dread that she might never see her loved ones again. Hunger gnawed at her point. One of the older girls, a skeletal Romanian with haunted eyes, managed to whisper to her during a fleeting moment of freedom. "Don't give in, Anya. Someone's coming." Anya grasped those words like a talisman, a silent incantation against the darkness. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Hours trickled by before John's phone vibrated. Raven's message was terse and chilling. Nightingale equals girls. Priority Alpha equals top dollar. Consignment equals slave market. Docks near Gdansk. A wave of icy dread washed over John. Time was leeching away as he gathered his equipment, the comforting weight of his Glock settling into his palm. Gdansk, a port city he had to move. Anya's survival, and the freedom of those other girls, rested on it. Victor Sadowski had awakened a sleeping giant. Race against time. The final string of alphanumeric characters swam into focus. John rubbed his burning eyes. 3 days. 3 days he'd spent deciphering the encrypted files recovered from the abandoned warehouse. He'd been on the verge of giving up, convinced it was a dead end. But then, a breakthrough. Damn, he breathed, leaning back in his chair, the squeak of the worn leather echoing in the cramped apartment. The decrypted file contained a manifest, a shipping manifest. The women, the missing women, were being transported out of Warsaw by train. Cargo train number 47 beat destination. Unknown. Estimated departure. Less than 24 hours. He grabbed his phone. Adrenaline suddenly coursing through him. Erasing the fatigue, he dialed Elena's number. The line rang twice before she answered, her voice tight with barely suppressed panic. John? Anything. I found something that they're moving them. Cargo train? Tomorrow morning. Train yard near the docks. Silence, he could practically feel her hope battling with her fear over the phone line. Tomorrow? But that's all the time we have. That's all we have, he confirmed, the words heavy. I need to get into the yard. Find the train. Find your daughter. He could hear her weeping softly. Thank you, John. Thank you. He hung up, the weight of her gratitude and her terror settling on his shoulders. He wasn't a hero. He was a security consultant. Haunted by ghosts he couldn't outrun. He should walk away. He always walked away. But he couldn't this time. He pulled up a map of the train yard on his laptop. A sprawling network of tracks, loading docks, and warehouses, all bathed in the harsh glare of security lights and patrolled by armed guards. He zoomed in, studying the layout, searching for weaknesses. Fences, blind spots, camera placements. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He pushed himself away from the desk and moved to the back of the apartment. To a locked cabinet tucked away in the shadows, he unlocked it, the tumblers clicking softly in the silence. Inside, nestled in foam padding, were the tools of his former trade. A silenced pistol, a combat knife, a small arsenal of lockpicks, and a pair of night vision goggles. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the window as he carefully selected what he needed. He checked the pistol. The metallic click, a stark punctuation in the quiet room. He sharpened the edge of the knife with a practiced hand, the steel glinting wickedly. He strapped the night vision goggles to his head, testing their functionality. Everything had to be perfect. There was no room for error. Meanwhile, across town, Elena paced her tiny apartment, the rhythmic squeak of the floorboards a counterpoint to the frantic hammering of her heart. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, sent a jolt of fear through her. She clutched a worn photograph of her daughter Anya, her fingers tracing the outline of her smiling face. Anya's bright, hopeful eyes seemed to accuse her. Was she doing enough? Should she be doing more? She glanced at the clock. The hands seemed to mock her, moving with agonizing slowness. Time was slipping away. Her daughter was out there, somewhere, and she was helpless to reach her. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her, the acrid taste of despair rising in her throat. Back in his apartment, John stripped down to black clothing, his movements efficient and precise. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the cold, focused energy that had kept him alive in countless dangerous situations. He was a ghost, a shadow, a weapon. He wouldn't fail. He couldn't. He checked his watch. Midnight. He had less than 8 hours before the train pulled out of the station. Time to move. He slung a backpack over his shoulder, the weight of the gear reassuring. He took one last look around the apartment, a sterile, impersonal space that held no warmth, no memories. He was leaving it behind, stepping back into the darkness. For Elena, for Anya, and maybe, just maybe, for a sliver of redemption for himself. He closed the door behind him, the click echoing in the empty hallway. The race against time had begun. Shadows in the yard. The chain-link fence groaned under John's weight as he scaled it, the rusty metal biting into his gloved hands. Below, the train yard stretched like a black ocean punctuated by the skeletal silhouettes of cranes and the glint of steel rails. He dropped silently to the gravel, the impact muffled by the thick soles of his boots. The air hung heavy with the smell of diesel and damp earth. He pulled a small, handheld device from his pocket. It pulsed with a faint green light, mapping the location of security cameras based on the schematics he'd Acquired point 2 red dots blinked ominously to his left, indicating active surveillance. He crouched low, hugging the shadows cast by a row of stacked shipping containers. John Bishop was a creature of habit, and his habit was avoiding situations like this. But the image of that girl's haunted eyes, the desperation clinging to her mother's plea, it had burrowed under his skin. He was a security consultant, damn it, not a vigilante. Still, here he was. A gruff voice shattered the stillness. Sector 4, all clear. John froze. A guard, making his rounds, he pressed himself against the cold steel of a container. His breath shallow, he could hear the crunch of boots on gravel. Growing closer, he risked a peek around the corner. The guard, a burly man with a bored expression, was swinging a heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. Thinking fast, John pulled a small smoke grenade from his belt, a relic from his past life, one he'd hoped to never use again. He pulled the pin and tossed it behind the guard, aiming for a pile of discarded tires. The grenade hissed, releasing a thick cloud of gray smoke. The guard coughed, swinging his flashlight wildly. What the hell? John seized the opportunity. He slipped past the disoriented guard, moving deeper into the yard. The smoke offered limited cover, but it bought him precious time. He needed to find the specific cargo container, marked with a faded blue symbol, a seagull in flight, its wing clipped. He consulted the handheld device again. The signal was strongest near the far end of the yard, past the main loading platform. That meant navigating a maze of train cars, each one a potential hiding place, or a trap. As he moved, he noticed something else. The rhythmic thump of a generator. It was coming from a small, nondescript building near the perimeter fence. He detoured, his instincts screaming at him to investigate. He knew that if he was doing his job right, the perimeter cameras would be running from their own little generator. He crept toward the building, the generator's drone growing louder. He peeked through a grimy window. Inside, two men were playing cards, oblivious to the world outside. A tangle of wires snaked from a control panel on the wall, feeding the generator. This was too easy, but he wasn't going to complain about it. He picked the lock on the side door. With practiced ease, the men inside barely glanced up as he entered. "Evening, gentlemen," John said, his voice low and calm, just making a few adjustments. Before they could react, he sprayed a burst of pepper spray into the room. The men choked and sputtered, clutching at their eyes. John moved quickly, disabling the generator with a swift kick to the control panel. The building plunged into darkness, the rhythmic thumping silenced. Now, the whole yard would be blind. He melted back into the shadows, a grim satisfaction settling over him. One less obstacle. But he knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge, finding the container and whatever, or whoever, was inside, still lay ahead. The air crackled with unseen danger, and John Bishop, the reluctant hero, was walking straight into it. Container 74. John Bishop swore under his breath as the last CCTV camera flickered and died. The train yard was a labyrinth of steel and shadow, the air thick with the smell of diesel and damp metal. Container 74. That was the number. Maria, the terrified waitress he'd rescued from the back alley club, had managed to stammer out before collapsing into sobs. He found it tucked away in the farthest corner, a dented, rust-streaked monolith amongst hundreds of identical boxes. The manifest listed it as containing machine parts. Right. Machine parts that cried in the night, he thought grimly. He ran a hand along the corrugated steel, feeling for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing. Then, near the base, his fingers brushed against a seam, almost invisible, a hairline fracture in the metal. He pressed, and with a soft click, a section of the container wall slid inward, revealing a narrow, dark passage. The stench hit him first, sweat, fear, and something else. Something sickly sweet that made his stomach churn. He pulled out his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. The hidden compartment was smaller than he'd imagined, barely enough room to stand, and crammed into that space were 6 women, their faces pale and gaunt in the weak light. One of them, a young woman with haunted eyes, met his gaze. He recognized her instantly from the photo Maria had shown him. Anya Nowak. "It's okay," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "I'm here to get you out." Anya's relief was palpable, but cut short. A harsh voice barked from the other side of the hidden door. What the hell is going on in there? The door slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. John reacted instantly, shoving Anya and the others to the back of the compartment. He pressed himself against the door, bracing for the inevitable footsteps. The metallic click of a gun being cocked, he kicked the door with all his force, sending it flying inward, splintering the frame. Two men stood there, bathed in the dim light of the main container. One was tall and burly, a shaved head gleaming under the single overhead bulb, and the other was wiry and nervous, clutching a pistol with both hands. The burly one roared and charged, swinging a metal pipe. John ducked under the blow, grabbed the pipe and twisted, wrenching it from the man's grip. He used the pipe to sweep the legs out from under the wiry guard, sending him sprawling. The burly guard lunged again. Fists flying, John blocked, parried, and countered, the fight a brutal dance in the confined space. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. Anya, seeing her chance, scrambled to her feet and started helping the other women, pushing them towards the shattered doorway. The wiry guard, back on his feet, raised his pistol. John saw it in the periphery, a glint of steel in the dim light. That he moved, fast, throwing the pipe like a javelin. That it caught the guard in the chest, sending him staggering back against the container wall. The burly guard, distracted, stumbled. John seized the opportunity, landing a solid blow to the jaw that sent the man crashing to the floor, unconscious. "Get them out!" he yelled to Anya. His voice strained as he grabbed the wiry guard's pistol, checking the magazine half empty. More footsteps, heavier this time, echoing from the far end of the train yard. Reinforcements. Anya, with surprising resolve, was ushering the last of the women through the opening. "Come on," she urged, her voice trembling but firm. "We need to go." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Sergeant Pyotr Kowalski slammed his fist on the dashboard, cursing. Bishop's tip had been vague, a garbled mess about a train yard and container number 74. He dismissed it at first, too outlandish, too much like the ramblings of a vigilante. But something about the guy's intensity, the sheer desperation in his voice, had gnawed at him. He decided to check it out. Now, hearing the sirens, he knew he was too late as he pulled into the train yard. The flashing lights of the patrol cars painting the scene in stark red and blue. The place was swarming with cops. He spotted a cluster of officers near a container, their faces grim. He pushed his way through the crowd. A container door hung open, its frames splintered. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of blood and fear. One of the officers, a young rookie, pointed to the far corner. "Hidden compartment, Sergeant. Found 6 women inside. They were in bad shape." Kowalski swore again, a low, guttural sound as he looked around, his gaze sweeping across the chaotic scene. Bishop was gone. Just like always, he left behind a mess. But he also left behind results. Kowalski knew, with a sinking feeling, that this was just the beginning. The human trafficking snake had been struck, but the head was still out there, waiting to strike back, and Bishop, wherever he was, would be ready. He just wished he knew where Bishop was going next. The serpent revealed. The container doors thundered closed, the echo swallowed by the desolate rail yard. John wrestled the locking bar into place, the frigid steel a shock against his gloved skin. A lungful of Polish air seared his throat. They needed to vanish. Anya, face bleached pale by the sliver of moon filtering through the skeletal warehouse, trembled against him. The other women huddled close, a tableau of fear and bone-deep weariness. "We have to move," John muttered, urgency tightening his vocal cords. "Now, before." He guided them toward the perimeter fence, seeking a breach. The shriek of tires tore the night. Twin beams of light, incandescent and accusatory, flooded the yard, pinning the container in their glare. A black SUV screeched to a halt, a metal barrier against their escape. Viktor Sadowski unfolded himself from the vehicle, a cruel smile stretching his features. Flanking him were 2 brutes, bigger and more intimidating than the guards John had already silenced. They cradled automatic weapons with a casual menace. "Mr. Bishop," Sadowski purred, his voice a polished blade. "Disappointed doesn't begin to cover it. I overestimated your intelligence." John cursed his lapse in focus. He'd been too concerned with the women's safety, too slow to anticipate the countermove. Shielding Anya behind him, he stepped forward, an obstacle between them and Sadowski's welcoming party. "Let them go, Victor," John stated, his tone deceptively even against the frantic thrum in his veins. "This doesn't need to escalate." Sadowski's laughter was a dry rasp. "Escalate? It already has. You've become entangled in something far beyond your comprehension. Something indelible." He flicked a hand. "Secure the area. Ensure our guests remain within reach." The two goons moved with chilling synchronicity, positioning themselves to block any avenue of retreat. John's gaze flicked around the yard, searching for a sliver of advantage, finding none. "What are these women to you, Mr. Bishop?" Sadowski pressed, his eyes slitting. "Some misplaced gallantry? Or something deeper?" His gaze lingered on Anya, a spark of recognition igniting in his eyes. "Ah. Number 7. The pivot point. The one with inconvenient knowledge." Anya recoiled, pressing her face into John's coat as if to disappear. "You're trafficking in human misery, Victor," John retorted, his voice losing its calm. "You should be disgusted with yourself." Sadowski threw back his head, the harsh sound echoing off the metal containers, grating on John's nerves. "Disgusted? You have no idea the scope of this operation. This isn't some petty game. This is orchestrated, precisely calibrated, inconceivably lucrative." He edged closer, lowering his voice to a sibilant whisper. "And it's all due to the serpent." The name hung in the air, a venomous weight. John felt a primal shiver. He'd heard the rumors, whispers in the criminal underworld, of a puppet master orchestrating Warsaw's underbelly, a figure known only as the Serpent. "The Serpent," John echoed, skepticism coloring his tone. "You're telling me this entire enterprise is controlled by him?" Sadowski's smile broadened, revealing the glint of triumph. "He prefers to operate from the shadows, of course, but yes, Mr. Bishop. You've blundered into the Serpent's lair, and ignorance, in this case, is definitely not bliss." He snapped his fingers. "Take him down." The two men leveled their weapons. John knew he was outmatched, outmaneuvered, but surrender wasn't an option. He shoved Anya and the other women behind the container, improvising a barricade. "Stay low," he shouted, his voice barely cutting through the rising growl of the SUV's engine. He dove aside, narrowly avoiding a lethal spray of bullets that chewed into the container's corrugated steel. The sharp tang of gunpowder mingled with the women's screams of terror. He had to act, improvise, protect them. He was cornered, isolated, facing an opponent with seemingly limitless power, but he wouldn't yield. Not while they depended on him. The Serpent might be a formidable predator, but John Bishop was a force to be reckoned with when his back was against the wall. And the Serpent, he thought grimly, was about to feel his fangs. Justice in Warsaw. The air inside the warehouse hung thick with the stench of spent fuel and raw dread. Victor, surprisingly spry for his bulk, brandished a length of pipe. John dipped beneath the whistling arc of metal, closing the gap with lethal grace. A dull thud echoed as Victor landed a blow against John's ribs. An impact that barely registered. Years of disciplined fury had hardened him beyond Victor's comprehension. John seized Victor's wrist, a crunch threatening as bone met bone. A strangled bellow ripped from Victor's throat. John twisted, the pipe skittering across the grimy floor. He followed with a knee aimed at Victor's diaphragm, collapsing him in a desperate search for oxygen. "Where are the others?" John's voice, a gravelly threat, rumbled in the cavernous space. Victor, doubled over, could only rasp, "Serpent protects." Dismissing the claim, John's gaze swept the grimy space, settling on a keypad beside a reinforced steel door. Muffled whimpers and frantic pleas seeped from within. He moved forward, caution his shield. Something felt amiss, too convenient. He traced the doorframe, searching for anomalies. His fingers brushed against a nearly invisible wire, a trap and insurance policy. "Everyone, back!" he roared, silencing the despair. Carefully, he followed the filament to a pressure trigger concealed beneath a dislodged floor tile. He recognized the design. A makeshift explosive, intended to erase all trace of its victims. A sheen of sweat slicked his skin as he worked with precise, deliberate movements. He located the detonator, a crude switch connected to a cluster of modified fireworks. A single mistake meant oblivion for the women trapped within it. He inhaled deeply, severing the connection with pliers pilfered from his waistband. A wave of collective relief washed through the warehouse as the danger subsided. He entered the override code 2-7-0-4. A date seared into his memory, and the steel door creaked open. 6 women huddled within, their eyes mirroring their terror. Among them, John recognized Anya. The faded photograph Elena had clutched offered instant identification. Her face drawn, her eyes haunted, yet it was her. "Anya?" he asked softly, approaching with measured steps. She flinched, then peered at him, struggling to focus. "Do I know you? My name is John. Your mother sent me." Tears sprang to her eyes. "Mama? Is she alive?" Before John could respond, sirens sliced through the night, their mournful cry signaling the end of his time. "They're here," he announced, turning to the other women. "You're safe now," he addressed Anya. "Go to her. She's waiting." He gestured toward the entrance. "The police will handle everything." As the first officers stormed through the doorway, weapons raised, John vanished into the dim recesses. Sergeant Pyotr Kowalski, his face a roadmap of exhaustion, took in the scene. The rescued women, the unconscious Victor, the disarmed bomb. He muttered a curse. Bishop had been present. Again. "Perimeter secure," Kowalski barked, his voice raspy. "Get those women out of here. Arrest Sadowski and his associates." The warehouse throbbed with activity as officers descended, documenting the scene, gathering evidence, and hauling Victor and his groaning crew into transport vehicles. Kowalski surveyed the chaos, a mixture of elation and irritation churning within him. Relief that the women were rescued, frustration that Bishop had once again slipped away, leaving behind a wake of destruction and unresolved inquiries. Beyond the police tape, Elena Nowak waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched the ambulances, the flashing lights, the officers leading the survivors from the warehouse. Then, she saw her. Anya stumbled towards her, tears etching trails on her face. "Mama?" she breathed. Elena surged forward, pulling her daughter into a desperate embrace. Years of agony and uncertainty dissolved in a deluge of tears. The world contracted, leaving only mother and daughter clinging to one another, reunited as dawn's first light bled across the Warsaw skyline. John stood on the banks of the Vistula, watching the city rouse itself. He was a specter, a wraith, a force for retribution moving in the shadows. He had returned Anya to her mother. He had crippled one facet of the serpent's operation. But this was only the start. The serpent yet lurked, its grasp extending into the darkest corners of the world. And John would be there, watchful, primed to strike again. He turned, melting into the fading darkness, leaving Warsaw incrementally safer, incrementally less shattered.